Here
All
we go
right.
again.
Yeah. So this is a ride with author and investment banker Evan Marks.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a technical issue that starts off, but we get it ironed out. And he's the mysterious Evan Marks in this particular episode. If you're watching on YouTube, otherwise, if you're just listening, he's mysterious for other reasons. I particularly enjoyed the conversation. His candor, his transparency, his articulation of certain ideas, really informative. A lovely human being. Um, yeah, and the book's good too. I've been reading the book, so check it out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking it out. I glanced at it, but anyway, so please subscribe, support Blast, Compton Cowboys. Hit us up. Check out our live streams on Wednesday mornings and enjoy the ride.
Sis, hallo?
Blijven.
Bestuur zeker wegen dem.
Yo je iets niet, joh.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Moped Outlaws. Today, our guest is Evan Marks, an author whose book is going to launch this May, very soon, and who is also someone who lives the New York life, who is involved in investment banking and has had a musical past as well. So welcome, Evan. It's great to have you.
Hey, guys. Thank you. It's great to be on here. Nice to meet as well.
I was really grateful to receive an advanced copy of Vesper, and I'm usually skeptical. I read a lot of books when I do interviews with authors, and honestly, I'm in that zone where it's going to be one of my summer reads. I can't wait to just like relax with it and really dig in and read it. I couldn't put it down last night when I did some cursory reading. What was it that inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, it really came down to watching a movie called Alfie, which was Jude Law, and it was in the 2000s. And the movie was based on a play by Bill Norton. And it really, the story is about a character study, effectively, of this charismatic, male who traverses around their respective city, living the highs and lows of the dating life. In the play, it was in London, and in the film, it was in New York. And when I watched it, I was a kid in Australia, and this was at like peak movie entertainment era where mobile iPhones hadn't really sucked up your attention and all of that. And so it just had this real captivating impact, particularly around the showcasing it did of New York and the charisma of Jude Law. And anyway, the movie stuck with me. I was watching it in 2023, and I'm like, wouldn't it be interesting if Alfie was a woman, not a man? And I should preface this by saying that the idea of writing a book just generally came to me in COVID in 2020. And I was exploring some ideas around this thing called a Mandela effect and a sci-fi thriller kind of story. And then I didn't really have a lot of excitement about developing it. And I eventually just said, look, the world doesn't need a Dan Brown novel, another one now. And then, we all went back to life after COVID finished. And then there was this dormant interest in the book that really just came out when I was watching this Alfie movie. And the novelty of a man writing a woman about a charismatic player just seemed quite interesting to explore, but like a huge task to try and do. And so the first thing I did, and I don't want to jump the gun here if you want me to just kind of, pause around there, but, I went and just did a bunch of research as to looking at men that have tried to do the women's point of view, because there had been several women that had written the men's point of view very, very well, both in terms of getting it right and the reception that it got. But I struggled to find the woman's point of view. But yeah, that's how it all came together, that really around this movie, Alfie.
Got it. Well, the main character that you've written her name is Vesper. Mm-hmm. And at the level at which I've accessed the book, I'm curious, is Vesper someone you met, or is that an archetype of a woman that you've spent time with in the West Village or in Manhattan in general?
It was no, I would say it's a bit of an amalgamation of certain people. You know, it's not like a broad amalgamation. It's definitely taken some of the aspects of people that have been very, fondly, that I get fondly interacted with. There's parts of my mother who passed away. Her name was Valerie, and the book is dedicated to her, Valerie, and Elizabeth, and my sister Cheryl. Although Valerie is also my grandmother's name. My mum's name is Valerie Elizabeth, but the V and the V kind of aligned up with that. There's part of, certain women that I've dated that I've really admired certain behavioral and emotional traits about them, and just also their wit and banter and things like that. And there's also, some of myself in there as well, just my internal monologue, my philosophy, a whole variety of things. But as far as like one person, no. But a couple of people, yes.
So with your own personal experience researching this, and then your own personal experience with romance, do you have a hopeful outlook for romance in the world, or a more acerbic outlook?
No, I think it's romance is great in everything that you do. I tend to romanticize like a lot of everything that I do, and whether it's this, like the idea of writing a book and really enjoying it and seeing it through, or like a holiday that I'm going to do with my mates. As far as like dating romance and lifelong romance in a partner and stuff, I'm definitely on the optimistic side. I'm optimistic generally about everything. But yeah, no, I totally buy into the romance aspect. But, what I try to do is that there's this convention that, particularly in Australia and a little bit around certain parts of America, is that there's this timeline that everyone kind of needs to follow. And it's, this formula where you kind of do this, then you do that, then you meet somebody, you date them for a while, you get married, you have kids, and so on. And I'm just trying to say that's fine, but you guys just need to be aware that whatever's right for you was totally fine as well. If you want to just date to have fun, which is what Vesper's approach is, just because you want to have the experience and grow and just take it for what it is versus an agenda, that's really fine. And if you want to date to find somebody to have a husband and get on with your life because they have a family, because that's a priority, that's good as well. And if you're on the more, nefarious aspect where you really want, your dating partners to fund your lifestyle, fine. But there's no one formula that romance has to apply to. And that's the idea around how we pitch it as an anti-romance story. Anti in the sense that we're not following a conventional romance formula. We're saying that romance can be any form you want it.
Am I recalling correctly that Alfie ends with this note of like a bittersweet melancholy because he realizes that being a player ultimately wasn't fulfilling him, and isn't there like a relationship that he did value leaves his life because he's a player?
Yeah, there is. And so some of the I didn't do a carbon copy of Alfie because it's just obviously difficult, just given Jude or Alfie's character. That doesn't transfer so well to a woman. But there are certain aspects of the plot that I've tried to do an homage to. In fact, the very overarching thing is charismatic woman, enjoys the dating life, does not want to settle down, accidentally settles down, and then ultimately realizes she was better off in the first place how she was. And then what I did was I put my own story around that. And then, throughout there are a couple of like references to Alfie indirectly. So the point where you mentioned that there's a form of flame that he runs into, and it's a little bit bittersweet because he had a real opportunity with her, but she ended up moving on because he was a playboy. And then he revisits her when he's at his lowest point. That's incorporated in spirit towards the end of the book as well. But it's also, which is what I tried to do with the epigraph with Ovid, saying that everything changes. I modified that completely wrongly, intentionally, to include that everything changes, everything remains the same, because I wanted to incorporate Ovid. He's got the metamorphosis. There's the reference at the peak scene in that play, in that poem. And it also captures the spirit of where Vesper, everything changes, but it remains the same in a sense. She goes back possibly, I don't want to spoil anything, to where she began, but you can never be the same person because of the experience you lived through. So,
Yeah, it's interesting to see how philosophers and literary dynamos, for lack of a better term, influence the way that characters interact. And I found that really interesting about the conversations that those characters have. And it appears as though you've spent some time with the Stoics and the philosophers as well.
yeah, I'm definitely not a philosophy graduate, but a lot of the time, my free time is spent reading a variety of different stuff, of which philosophy is one. I also just tend to think a ton about random stuff, and my views and thoughts tend to have a philosophical aspect to them. But I'm not a scholar by any means.
So I was talking with someone the other day about this idea that a romantic partner completes an individual, and the false, that being a false concept, because then you're taking the responsibility of your wholeness and putting it on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Is that explored in this story, or?
Well, there's some references there where she's kind of doing a stream of consciousness around why she enjoys dating approach that she follows, which is the single life, effectively. And it's really taking pride in independence is one part of it. And so, part of taking your personality and putting it in somebody else, or having somebody else's personality make up a large part of completing you, is in some ways against this independence thing, because that's saying, I value me for who I am, and I don't need another person to validate that for me, whether that's, a lifelong partner. She's saying it more in the context of short term, where I think she says something about a reference of walking into a room, not searching for the one, but knowing that you are the one without them.
Brilliant. I find that a lot of the characters, the male characters, especially in the first several chapters of the book, represent a difficulty for women of substance in that social class. And I'm wondering what you think it is about the modern young man that is lacking, and that we as men could improve upon.
I mean, I think us men are great, candidly. I mean, are we perfect? No, nobody's perfect. It's very individual driven as well. Like, certain people need more work than others. I think it's very real that there's a maturity gap between men and women. And so when I'm 20 trying to date 20-year-olds and I'm not really going that far, it's only until I'm several years older dating 22-year-olds. And I'm just using that because it came to my head. Like, as a grown man, I'm not dating 20-year-olds and 22-year-olds. But just as an illustration, there's a real thing about these maturity gaps. And so I don't know, maybe that's more an observation than a criticism. And so
what I noticed about Alpha,
mature, if it's the word, but I don't think there's anything, sorry to cut you off, I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. It's just a biological thing that I think is fairly accurate, that women mature, and so as a result they tend to bond better with men a few years older than them. But other than that, yeah, can't really
the nature of my question penetrates the idea of there's a transition point between, say, a 27-year-old male and a 34-year-old male who has actuated himself in a certain sort of way. And there's a kind of dismissive conversation that's a subtext of the various girlfriends that she has in the book that talk about the clinger stage 5 and the earnestness of men and wanting relationships. And it feels like there's something in there that's a bit of a critique and an acknowledgement of what it is that men face.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering where you see yourself on that continuum.
Yeah. Some of it is very cerebral, what I've tried to do, and some of it may come across more in depth than what I actually intended, which is awesome as well. There's like a very kind of variety of ways you can interpret it. The clinginess part is, that's just, there are some people, some guys and some girls who are just very clingy, and girls just don't like that. There's this kind of less is more approach when it particularly, around this early courting phase. The other thing I tried to do, again, was do a bit of an Easter egg to Alfie, where Alfie call it a clinging aspect about a woman doing it. I would say, me personally, I definitely have gone along the way where there's been some clinginess because I've kind of got ahead of my skis about being into a girl. And there's been times where I probably should have been more clingy, I would say over the years, with experience in dating and maturity, my approach to managing relationships has gotten better, which isn't surprising, like everybody, unless you're really, doing life the wrong way. But, I'm definitely by no means like a perfect, dating guy. I kind of wasn't really dating candidly last year. I had a bit of a break to work on this book. So, lots of room to grow in that area as well.
How has your musical past of being a producer informed your awareness of human dynamics, of relationship dynamics?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. What the DJing? So my music background was formally trained in a couple of instruments, moved on to DJing on records, vinyl records, and basically taught myself how to DJ when I was in high school, which is a funny story in itself. And then moved on to electronic music production and event management and so on. And, the experience of the latter gave you a sense, because in hospitality, as well as, commanding a dance floor, you need to be attuned to individuals as well as groups. And so you become more perceptive, I guess, either subconsciously or consciously, in observing some of that dynamic. But that's more, I'd say, just becomes an instinctual thing versus something that, intentionally informs an approach to it.
So it's instinctive. Your read on human beings and relationships is really less analytical and more instinctive.
In terms of what I've got from the music element of it, yes. And it's instincts that have been built through experience in music.
Right.
Yeah, innately. Mm-hmm.
There's a character who owns an art gallery, who is said in chapter 3 to be able to just kind of move people however she wants emotionally. And that struck me as an interesting power dynamic. And I'm wondering if you've met people like that in New York, for whom it's almost not serious, that it's really catch and release kind of modality.
Yeah, I definitely have, guys and girls. That's kind of I had a lot of fun. The character you're referring to is Aya. And I had a lot of fun writing her, because she's really a caricature, an extreme version of the gold digger, but likable and just brutally authentic about it as well. So she was just absolutely entertaining to write. But I wouldn't say I have met someone who, because of the caricature nature of her, is like that. It's more just like a composition of some of these behavioral traits that I've seen, and I think everyone's probably come across gold diggers in both the male and female form, or people with, intentions that aren't really what they put forward, that are very more superficial and short-term in nature.
It seems to me like one of the key themes is that intimacy is scary to all of these characters, except for the eventual hero, the love interest at the end, for whom intimacy is welcome and well managed. Do you think that's an accurate insight into the characters you created, or am I just making that up?
No, I think that's just, no, I think, well, I mean, look, everyone's free for the interpretation, and I love having different interpretations. And one of the things I actually just wrote in an interview was, what I like about writing is that everyone's going to have, people can have different opinions of the story and characters in their head, despite having a source. And so I think in this case, Mark, Vesper has some concerns around intimacy, but more around just not because, well, actually, I think her issue, and when I was writing her as a character in the backstory, was she's kind of got this, she was once fine with intimacy in relationships. She ended up having an issue when she was at college. And as a result of that, that was a catalyst where she met Aya. And Aya basically brought her under a wing and showed how you can do dating as a single person right. And then she's kind of revisited that with her own philosophy about why she's doing it, which is to enjoy the single life for all that it offers, more so than being worried about intimacy. But I think fundamentally there's an element of, concern around getting hurt again. But that's really just her. I don't think the other characters have that. Like her sister is in a good relationship until she's not. Her family have great intimate relationships. You can see they're loving each other and supportive and have raised great family. There are her girlfriends that seem to be very prepared to settle down and have a serious relationship. There's Bridget, who's hilariously disastrous. But I think it's just more, this particular Vesper and a minor point, which I did intentionally to just add some depth to her character and psyche and so on. But debate me if you disagree, because it's an interesting interpretation.
No, I love what you said about it, because as a creative person, one of the joys is to get to feel and see and hear the reflections of what it is that people feel and hear in the work that you've done. And I'm fascinated by the characters you created. I think for a first novel, there's a quality to it that's somewhat surprising. Like when I expected less from you. Sorry to say, Evan. And I was pleasantly disappointed in myself to find out that it's really is a mover. Like I really want to keep reading the next chapter. And maybe it's because my spouse and I watch too much reality TV or whatever, but nonetheless, I'm enthralled with the story. And it's interesting because I've been curious about what your experience is. And I'm from this so far in the conversation, I'm making up the story that you also feel like Vespa, in the sense that having a single life and being whole unto oneself is a powerfully joyful experience in life, and there's no need to rush into anything. Is that an accurate reflection of how you feel about it?
Beautifully eloquent way. Yes, that captures it perfectly. I'm going to have to write that down. In fact, I'm going to listen to this and I'm going to have to just lift that and just use that in my own answers. Because, yeah, you summed it up perfectly.
Got it. So what scares you about women?
I wouldn't say, nothing comes immediately to mind.
Thank you. I love that answer.
Let me just have a think, though. I mean, there must be. I mean, yeah. I mean,
nothing is a perfectly acceptable answer. I'd go with that, Evan.
Yeah, that everything's really good. And I try to see the greatness in everybody. And I think gender, they're great. They're very complementary to males. They've got their own peculiarities, idiosyncrasies that, can be frustrating at times, but definitely not, a disaster or anything like that. They're just different people, but then they're so common in other ways. And part of it with this, it's been very interesting to see some commonality despite the stereotypes around genders, to see that there are some overlaps that people might not otherwise have thought because a male's tried to do the female voice. But yeah, I wouldn't say anything particularly scares me about women. What about you guys? Anything scare you that I'm missing?
Well, I think from my own personal experience, heartbreak is devastating. And there's always that potential, it seems, when getting into a romantic relationship.
No, that's a good one. What about you, Mark?
Well, I'm a very complex, wounded individual. So what scares me about women is a reflection of that. I'd say, just to be really frank and insightful, finding someone whom I adore, who learns over time that they don't necessarily want to be with me anymore, which that's as clean and clear as I can say about my fears about women.
Yeah. Yeah.
there's some shadowy stuff that I won't go into, but what I love about being a heterosexual man is that there's this mysterious aspect of femininity that at the same time I feel like I have some insight into at the age of 63, also remains elusive and fun to tease out. Like in the book, you use the word banter, that men engage in banter at a level which is sort of frivolous. But to me, the art of banter is one of the best aspects of getting to know someone, and not banter in the sense that it's worthless and it's aimless, but banter that's entertaining and preserves mystery and that sort of sweet tension of discovery.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I absolutely love banter. It's a very hard thing to get right, let alone possess. And it, I think, is also, codependent was something it's chemistry driven. Like the banter between two individuals exists because of those two individuals and what each of them bring in combination. But it can also obviously exist anywhere, but in its most powerful form. That's the banter that I just love. And it's like you said, there's mystery, there's entertainment, there's wit and intelligence that goes into it. There's this anticipation of where it's going to come, what's going to come next, all while you don't even really know or think about it. It's all very subconscious, but you really enjoy it until it comes around and you need to respond. And then sometimes it's not, it's very conscious and you go back and look and go, gosh, that was a great little conversation. And sometimes it's gone and you kind of miss what you had. A whole variety of forms around banter. I'm a huge fan of it. In the romance. Yeah.
Evan, so this is dedicated to your mother and sisters. Were your mother and father together during your lifetime, or did they divorce? What was their relationship like?
No, they were together for the entirety of my life. They've both passed, sadly, but they were together. There's drama along the way, like every family, I guess, and great times. Ultimately, in the very end, I knew that they loved each other dearly, and I could see that from, and that really made me happy because there were times where I wasn't quite sure what was going on. And to have that validation of true love between the two people after such a long period of a marriage and knowing them for my life was just a really nice thing to not clarify, but just know deep down.
So does that inform your vision of romance and relationships with romantic partners?
No, it doesn't, frankly. But I think a lot of you are a product of your environment, in a large way. And maybe it plays out subconsciously, but I feel like I'm very much my own person and my approach is different.
And then when you and Mark were talking about banter, do you find that there's a place for silence in being with someone you want to be romantic with or are romantic with?
Yeah, for sure. The comfortable silence that comes. I think that's a nice milestone in a relationship when you get to that point, and it can come any period of the relationship. So that's very lovely as well. You don't want to have a silent partner the entire time because that would be boring. But definitely that quiet comfort and silence you have is a really nice thing to achieve. I would just say that I guess what I have been influenced by with my family is just my parents is, long-term single partner marriage is the thing. Right. That's just my view. So when I find a partner, it's someone that I want to have the rest of my life with, the usual marriage thing. And, I would, have kids, and my dad was a little old when he had kids as well, which I guess speaks to why I'm still, unmarried now. But other than that, I'm very much an American, well, more American than what I was, being here for 11 years. Had lived out of home since I was like 18 years old. And so, there's a part of the life where your parents' influence diminishes from your other experiences that come in, leaving those parts that I just referenced as the main things that are projected into, my dating views.
Well, how do you feel about what I see a lot of the youth experimenting with now with gender and saying and sexuality and the fluid aspects that I see happening amongst late teens, early 20s?
I don't really know, Greg, about that. You know, I got chastised the other day twice, actually. One by a very good friend of mine who's in his 60s, and another by someone who was at lunch in their early 20s. And both of them were like, your cultural references and awareness of what's going on is just terrible. And so I didn't know any memes. And so I'm not that attuned to a lot of, like, I don't have Instagram. I'm not on social media. And I'm kind of in a bubble in my neighborhood in downtown Manhattan, so I'm not really that privy. I don't have anything against any of that. I'm a very kind of open-minded kind of guy, but I don't really have a perspective on it.
What do you think? Or do you have a spiritual element in your own character of something beyond the physical? And if so, how is romance a piece to us finding out what that is, if it is?
I mean, I'm definitely a spiritual person. I haven't really thought of it in the romance context. But
how does spiritual show up for you? What is it?
It's nothing that I've really thought about intentionally. I would say there's a lot of, and also something that I have dedicated to. It's more an afterthought or a subconscious thing where I'm aware of an interest and registering some spiritual things, whether that means signs that you see. I guess one would be, after my parents have passed, as I think out loud. What I'm trying to say is that it's not something I'm too aware of, other than knowing deep down that I'm inclined to have that type of view. And it's also something that I really want to spend more time discovering and exploring later on when I have time. I just haven't been able to prioritize it, but know that it's, an important part that I will get to. But then in the interim, there's been, small stuff that I kind of, take. It's just a pleasant thing to notice, which is like little signs from your parents, which sounds probably a little bit ludicrous, but I don't really care because my parents have gone. And if I take this as a sign from them saying hello, that's great on my accord. And so seeing little things about their personality or things that they have in Australia or whatever just pop up on either key dates or not has been really nice. And I think that's a spiritual connection that, is associated with that.
Got it. Doing the kind of work that you do is very competitive environment and also very demanding because the people that you serve are relying on you in what is clearly rocky and rough seas in the investment world. And you found time to write a book, which is coming out in about 6 weeks-ish. How do you view the requirements of supporting the book, the kind of publicity you're going to do? Are you going to do a book tour? How is that something that is impacting your life at this point, at the launch of this book?
It's been fine in the sense of it's been manageable. A lot of the time and effort that went into the book got done last year, and I just basically gave up a lot of holidays. Like July 4th would be, that holiday period I'd be writing the whole time. And then Saturday, Sunday, I'd be writing. The Saturday, Sunday writing sessions weren't as efficient because I'm switching from finance mode into writer mode. And so there's a conversion period. But say Sunday morning, I get in my stride because I've got Saturday's worth of momentum. And so it's really been quite straightforward with that done. I gave it to my copy editor last October, and she took it from 103,000 words down to like 99,000, and then from there is when it, the whole production and all of that process came out in the books there. So it's really, to the extent I want to write another book, I'm going to have to think about that. And the markets are getting better now and busier, which will be less accommodating because I'll probably be doing more weekend work than I used to if it goes as explosive with deals as it is expected. But as far as the promotion of this, it's fine. And work have been great. Like, they know about it formally because you've got to register these types of things. The team have been very supportive about it. We're not making a big deal out of it. The people that I work with in the industry come up and ask me how it is, what's the latest for it, one-on-one. So it's not like they're trying to punk me about things either. So the support's generally been good. And I put an acknowledgement in the book just to say thanks for my peers in the industry. As far as a book tour goes, I'm not sure if I'm going to, if I did, I'd have to just try and find the time, which would be market dependent. But because of the, the writing name approach that we've talked about, they'll have to kind of see how much that allows for as well.
So your publisher isn't putting anything in the contract that requires some sort of performance on your part to support the book.
That's right.
Got it. And podcasts are a great way to get the word out there. So I imagine you're beginning to do quite a few. Yep.
They've been very entertaining, fun. This has been great as well so far. Still got some time to go.
We're about to take a turn.
No, we're not.
Have real conversations with people about something that I've spent a lot of time in. You guys really get it, and you've been very kind with the feedback on it, and deep with where you want to kind of discuss. So I've really enjoyed it so far.
Got it. You mentioned that you have a second book that you're interested in writing if you can manage the time commitment. And from what you mentioned earlier about time during the pandemic, it seems like that idea is potentially going to come back in a new form. What's the second book going to be like?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out now. I've got 4 stories that I want to do. And originally the second one was going to follow on and be about memory, determinism. What I try to do is take a genre framework and then apply a scientific or philosophical idea around it. And I didn't know this at the time, but this guy who I'm very influenced by, Alex Garland, who wrote The Beach, and then he went on and directed Ex Machina and wrote it, and Debs. I was watching an interview with him recently, and he said his approach to writing something comes out of a research interest that he has. And the story is really the consequence of all of the findings that he's learned and his way to distill that into something that's memorable. And that's kind of what I've done here. I'm interested in all these different things. I find memory interesting in the sense that, everything that you kind of do is governed by memory, but there are so many things that can affect memory around confabulation, dementia. My father, unfortunately, had dementia, which is part of the reason why I'm interested in exploring this. And what that can do to the reliability of your perspective and so on. But then I want to tie it into a genre to make it, in a format that can be interesting as well and dramatic and so on. But I don't want to be too formulaic. So that was the first one. And then the second one was doing an Australian epic, looking at, Indigenous Australians, which is a bit of an homage to my culture back home, and just kind of comparing that to American culture in kind of like a dual character study from 2 different parts of the world and how they interact and what can come with that, which I'm really excited about. I think that's going to have to come a bit later. And then the other one was kind of looking at, cults basically, and using basically just things around like a little bit of a study on consciousness, which is getting more topical now with more information, but then how do you take that? What's a mechanism to explore that? Well, cults at the other end obviously get quite spiritual, but cults can take different forms, whether they're going to be scientific or, other. But as a way of like affecting change, they're very interesting. I also don't know a lot about them. So I thought marrying those two up in some type of thriller kind of story would be very interesting. Again, taking 2 extremes of a similar view and creating tension from that dynamic. And so originally, long story short, I was thinking about the memory one, but the more I've started looking into this cult consciousness kind of thing, that could be it. I don't know. got to get the first one done and hopefully well received, and then we can think about it.
I think you're going to do fine on the first one. It's definitely a fun read for sure. As far as cults, and something that occurred to me when you were mentioning this, given your day job, there's a kind of, from my perspective, a kind of cult phenomenon that arises in pursuing certain markets. And one of the ways to actually do well is to actually break out of groupthink and to have an innovative approach to investment. Do you see that there's like people get on bandwagons and they get stuck there, and then there's a kind of breakout movement that is where the next layer of profit comes from and the next layer of investment prowess comes from?
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I haven't thought about that. I guess that would lead to looking at cults and the forms that they can take, right? Which is, in the most traditional sense, those guys in the middle of the country being weird, but they're kind of prevalent also in just everyday things like financial markets, as you pointed out, Mark. Super interesting. Yeah, that definitely applies. You've got the market consensus, which is often very wrong. You've got some guys that are called contrarians that take the opposing view and do very well. George Soros was, most notable with that. With some of his very large-scale macro bets, but they can come in any form, whether it's a single day trader having a different view, people realizing he's onto something either from word of mouth, because word travels very fast, or just from the person who was contrarian being right and the market finally catching on to them being right. But you definitely have herdist mentality in the markets. And if you are aware of it and people have been, getting more attuned to it, you can actually be profiting from that, because you can kind of get it closer with technology these days to predict where behavior is going to manifest themselves and so on. We're not allowed to trade, unfortunately, at my institution individually. So any of the theses that we have around this is more isn't really put to work. Although crypto we can do, blockchain and so on, we can do that. So I've got a few theses around that, which also relate to what you're saying here around this herd mentality and applying a contrarian view.
Did you train at all within that organization for a Hormuz interruption in the markets? Was there any kind of pre-training that had you guys do scenarios and theses for the kind of environment we're operating in now, or is it just kind of you got thrown into the maelstrom?
The latter. No, but from doing it for quite a long time, that's the training you've got, which makes you adaptive to different markets, and you develop a decent eye at spotting opportunities to pivot away from something or to get ahead of something, so you're not completely caught off guard when things turn against you or in a different way. And there are times where it's totally fine to just sit on the fence and just wait for things to go by, because there's just nothing you can do about it. And there's more to lose than you could to gain, because it's just so volatile and uncertain out there. But ideally, you're trying to be reactive, or, if you can, proactive about spotting something. That doesn't come that often. But if you can be proactive, then you can really get ahead.
I'm hearing a lot that we're in a very volatile time politically on a global scale, that it's not just here in the United States, it's global. And I'm also hearing that's bringing a fragility to the financial markets, and that people are playing very conservatively right now. Is that true, or is that just my own layman ignorance?
No, it's definitely, there is a lot of that. It's hard if you want to try and sell a company, for example. It's why do that when you can just wait a little longer and see what where things land. I mean, I was saying to a friend the other day, never have we seen, I don't think, so many different macro factors to consider that are having an effect. And yet no one really, if you just took the time to try and study what was going on, you'd be so informed about what you want to do for your next move, which also goes to your point earlier, Mark. But no one has the time. But then, in 6 months, 9 months, people are going to turn around and say, gosh, that was so obvious in hindsight, but no one at the time sees it. But you know, you look at it on one hand, you've got all of the wars that are going on, and we've had a rough time since 22 after a big market in 21. And these are, you know, not just financial. The real keys, they're very tragic, obviously human affected things. But as we just put it in the context of markets, it's been terrible. 23, similar. We had, I think, in that case, we had Palestine and Israel. The year before was the Ukraine. 24, I think, was inflation. 25, we had Liberation Day. And then 26, we've had the Iran, Venezuela. We've got AI as well. And so it's like there's just so much complexity out there to try and understand why, you know, no one's rushing into anything. So that's one kind of factor. You know, when you look at companies that have, because of that 4 or 5 year period of, you know, disruption, what's another 6 months to 9 to 12 months to wait? You know, there is a lot of pressure in some of these investment portfolios to give money back to the investors because they need their money to generate the returns. But, you know, they all sympathize that the markets are tough right now to try and do something. And when oil price is going up and, you know, the consequences of that making its way down to costs for consumers and things like that, who knows? And then there's a federal response on interest rates potentially. So there's, you know, it sets up for just waiting. And then I guess on the other side, though, there are some, you know, investor classes that are taking advantage of this, like distressed investing, where, you know, AI has really, there was this revelation in April that, you know, AI is going to materially destroy some of these business models. And so the loans and bonds have traded off substantially. Oil price affects interest rates being at elevated highs with very levered businesses, highly debt incurred businesses. And so one guy that I know was raising a distressed fund, and he's like, this is the easiest time I've ever had to do it. So there are some winners and losers, but I'd say on the whole, people are being very cautious and just waiting, as they should, in my opinion.
It seems like romance and dating is much simpler than international finance.
Depends on what day of the week. Depends on what's happening as well. Like if you don't really have a lot going on in the dating and romance, finance is really interesting. And if you do have a lot going on, the finance becomes less interesting. It's great to just do both, you know, and have a bunch of different interests like you guys have with the people you look to meet and so on. Variety is the spice of life.
Okay, Greg and I are competing for who gets to ask, and I'm talking now, so I'm going to take the advantage. One of the main characters in the first part of the book, it goes on something called a kind of eat, pray, love holiday. He's a male character. If you were going to design your own version of, say, 6 weeks or 8 weeks eat, pray, love holiday for yourself, what countries would you go to and why?
You know, it's funny because when I was writing that point, I'd just come back from this thing called gardening leave, which is paid leave, where you're going between firms. And I did exactly that. I went on this, you know, multiple month tour where I went back to my family in Australia, and then made my way into China and checked out Shanghai, Beijing, and Guilin, which is why there's a China reference in the book about the emperors. And it's just this mosaic of disparate thoughts and observations and so on that have come into me, which the more you talk to me, you kind of see. My friends actually, when I was with on the weekend, was like, after reading it, she's like, there's so many of these stories you've told me along the way just incorporated in this. But going back to the travel point, China, then I did Korea, then I went to Greece, France, and Spain, and then back to America. Going now, it would be great. I'd love to do Africa. Yeah. Safari.
Well, one of the premises of the book, the original book, is that each of the destinations has a quality to it. Like I go to Italy to eat, and I go to India to pray, and then I go to Bali to fall in love. So if you were going to use that kind of a idiomatic approach, where would you go to eat? Where would you go to pray? And where would you go to find love? This is a version of, you know, kill, fuck,
right.
marry.
Gosh, eat would probably be Italy or France. Maybe Italy in a Tuscan backyard with home cooked Italian sourced from the country itself, cooked by Italians. You'd like a trifecta of greatness: country, product, and person cooking it. With that location's beautiful. The praying side, possibly, I'd love to get back to the Vatican City. Would be cool. I was there in 2010, and now that was a long time ago. With everything that experience has brought me, I'd love to go back and see it with a different lens. And then on the love side,
Thailand.
It's just, I'd have, wherever, roll the dice on that. Keep that one unknown. Surprise me. Leave some.
Okay. I love that.
Tell the travel agent to book me somewhere and then just see what happens.
Right.
Potentially. Yeah.
It's funny about love. It usually sneaks up on you when you're not looking. So the whole idea of going somewhere to find it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's kind of nice about it as well, I think. The surprise element.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a lot of things, if you just lower your expectations, I think, about things, one, you care less if it doesn't materialize, but two, if it does, the surprise factor just makes it, very enjoyable to experience. It's like a win-win.
I think that works for relationships, but I think it's a bad philosophy for self-direction. Settling for yourself is not something I would advocate. I think challenging is a much more effective means.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think lowering expectations was really saying get rid of expectations, let go of our thoughts of what something should be or will be, and be open to what's happening in each moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a definite left turn, but you mentioned earlier your interest in the Aborigines of Australia. And from what little I know, it seems like there's a lot of aspects there that we experience here in the United States with our history with Africans and African Americans. And do you see a correlation of the two?
I don't know a lot about the American indigenous population, Greg, but I did wonder if I should start exploring. There was a moment where I thought, I wonder if I make this more of an American indigenous character study than Australian. And then that was a very brief consideration just around, the audience that I'd be looking to read it, which would be, but then I ultimately am writing for my personal interests, and I decided, no, I want to make it an homage to my own country. But I don't know a lot about the Aboriginal culture down there, but I'm just fascinated by it, with everything about it. I literally would be going down. I mean, that's the other thing. To write it, I think you'd have to be living down there and interacting with all of them, and just absolutely, and also getting their permission to the people that do it the right way, and not go and either try and imagine something that you just don't have. Even though I tried to do the woman, which is probably a little bit easier. But go and just say to them, look, this is what I want to do. I want to hang around with you guys, learn about your culture, and then make sure that they're okay with the story that comes out of that. And if they're not, then I just wouldn't, I'd probably want to set it up in a way where I've got a bit of a preview to make sure I'm not completely wasting my time. So I know generally where I want it to go, but I also, don't want to, you got to do the right thing by these people.
It occurs to me that there's an element of empathy in both these realms, like with the realm of romance and relationship, and then with indigenous people and going into a culture and people that's completely foreign to oneself. It seems like a wise choice to always be as a guest in these realms, as a good guest.
Yeah, I'd say it just happened to kind of come out like that. Like Vesper only came together because I was watching Alfie, and I literally just had a brain spark, and I'm like, wouldn't it be interesting if Alfie was a woman? I didn't be like, oh, I want to write a book and I want to make the book about the women in the first person. And so I'm going to try and find a story for that. It all just came to me, and I was a little bit reticent because I'm like, gosh, I don't know if this is such a good idea doing a female first person, but the inspiration came first. And then with the Aboriginal story, I was at home visiting, in 23 with my family, and I mapped out this story. And it was all about, oh, wouldn't this be interesting if, you looked at this and then this and trying to put it together and see similarities and so on. More so than I want to find a different point of view to do as an author. It just happens to, so those two stories come from just an idea, but then the memory and consciousness cult thing come from very specific research areas that I want to learn more about.
But isn't with Vesper, now that Vesper's written and behind you, the idea of Elfie, that spark was like a key, and then you start walking into an authentic experience of.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Right. Yeah, I mean, for sure. Doing that and opening my mind to how much I enjoyed taking this, as you described it, the empathy of being in a role that isn't your own or whatever, or point of view. And yeah, definitely. Now, I didn't really think of it like that, but that's totally fair.
One of the things I really admire about your decision to just dive in on your instincts and write feminine characters in the first person is that it creates the opportunity for you to explore something that's interesting to you, and then that becomes interesting to the readers, whether they know it or not. And I'm hoping that instinct is something that you'll keep with you and be willing to let go of some of the calculus around whether you should do something and hold fast to the vivaciousness of what it brings up in you to do it.
Yeah, that would be my intention, Mark, for sure. But it's just going to depend on the receptivity, because I mean, look, I will try. I'm pretty good at just like marching forward in adversity for my entire life, but the number of times people have told me I'm not going to do anything, and then I'm just like, I don't even really listen. I just keep doing what I want to do and move forward. And so that will give me some layers to do what you're suggesting, but I'm definitely also probably going to be influenced by the receptivity of how this first book goes as well, which I don't think is too avoidable. But I'd say I'd give it a pretty solid shot to just keep marching through a lot of negativity and keep going ahead with the mission that you laid out.
How has the publishing journey felt for you in terms of the level at which your first book, your compensation package, you don't have to talk about the details of it, but the idea of what it is to enter into that arena and deal with the realities of cost, pricing, and compensation. How's your experience been in that regard?
It's been, I haven't really had any issues, candidly. It's been very smooth. So I don't really have a lot to really comment candidly on that.
As a musician myself, there's a kind of market structure that is built around the idea of advance and recoup.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the literary publishing market, that advance model has shifted quite a bit. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. Is it still functioning in your case, or is it you basically speculating and sharing in the revenue? How's it working for you?
Well, for me, it's I mean, this is a whole story in itself, but the book, I actually created a publishing company to release the book. And so any of the profit that goes in through that goes into my pocket. And the reason for that, and I don't know how much time you guys have, but I'm happy to keep talking about this in more detail, if you like.
Please.
Yeah. So and thankfully I was I watch a bunch of interviews of people, and I was watching Jeffrey Archer, and he's like, look, if you're not delusional thinking that you're going to sell 1 million copies of the book by the time you've written it, you haven't written the right book. And so I was delusional like that and ended up sending it out to a bunch of agents in May last year. And remember, I told you that the copy editor gave me the final copy back in October. So it was way early. I got 2 agents telling me this is really interesting. One of them said, this is better for this person, send it to them. And then I had basically 8 other rejections or ghosts. And I was like, okay, that's a bit of a bummer. But after talking with some of my writer friends, they're like, it's very difficult to get picked up by an agent. 1% of manuscripts get picked up. And I'm like, well, 99% of manuscripts aren't bad. Maybe 90% are, but that means 9% aren't getting the light of day just because of bad luck. And so it occurred to me that, you know, there may be a buyer's market opportunity there. And the other idea that I had is, you know, a lot of people don't feel comfortable putting a book out under, you know, Moped Outlaws, or I guess Mark Press, you know, or Mark Evans Press, or Evan Marks Press, whatever you want to say. And so as a result of that, you know, these people don't have a home despite their work being very good because they don't want to self-publish. And so I'm like, well, look, why don't I just go and create my own publishing business, and I can, you know, figure out a group of advisors that are going to partner with me, figure out the systems and processes you need to get the book out there. And then, you know, those people can then be, you know, used for other authors that sign on to the press. And, you know, what the people get is, you know, as a businessman, I get the buyer's market. I get to pick up 9% of I can be very selective with what I get. There's a good amount of quality out there. I can differentiate myself from the real independent presses because, you know, I'm prepared to invest more because I'm only doing a limited number of releases a year. And the way that it's been set up is efficient from a structural standpoint. And then I can, you know, recruit other writers because I'm both a writer per se, as well as a publisher. And so being in their shoes to empathize about what's important in that process, as well as having the wherewithal to get it done, and a group of sound partners who can deliver, you know, a very high quality product, should be compelling to have a great pipeline of work. And so that was the idea. And it's got to the point now where the book was really enjoyable. The stories that I've got are enjoyable, but I'm really pumped to just find other authors to release through the press. And it's all about doing what you guys have seen is entertainment with provocation, or entertainment with depth, where I want it to be, you know, commercially accessible, but also high quality prose, literary. I mean, I'm not going to say my prose is literary, but ideally, the ideal author would be someone who has beautiful writing with, you know, a really accessible and entertaining story that makes you think twice about what they're talking about, but doesn't alienate you for being too cerebral.
So it sounds like you are at peace with the possibility of your own path to improving the literary quality of your syntax as an exercise over time.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of work to go on that front.
So you got to write more and take your lumps. It's like you got to put the single out and see what the audience thinks, right?
Yeah.
Got to drop it on the turntable.
Yeah, it's funny though, because, you know, when I wrote the first couple of drafts and gave it to the developmental editor in October 24, I was like, this is done. She's going to say, great work. Wow. Well done. Let's get this out in the shelves. I'm going to be literally fighting over all the agents. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. It's just going to be so hard. And, you know, you don't realize, and that's that dumb, blind optimism that just kind of powers you along. You don't realize. I ended up revisiting the work in July last year and like, how did I write this? This is like the worst, shocking. And so that's why there was this delay in sending it to agents in March, May to October, getting it done. And, you know that I did the best that I can in that, what came out, but I'm probably going to look at it in a couple of years, or even just as soon as 12 months and go, I can't believe I wrote this gibberish. But, you know, learning and evolving, and as long as you're having fun and some people like it, that's great, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I'm really interested to follow the journey of your publishing house. What are you calling the publishing house?
Kinderspiel Press, which is German for child's play. And that was, you know, funnily enough, the name of a techno party that I went to back in Sydney, back in the day. And it's funny because I'm like, gosh, what a brilliant name. I mean, self-serving for me to say brilliant on your show, but what a cool name. And the party was really cool when it was, you know, back ages ago. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, I'd love to use that somewhere for something. And then it occurred to me this. But the other double meaning is that it's, you know, sometimes an industry that can take itself a little bit too seriously. And so it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way to, guys, let's just have fun and make it, you know, enjoyable. If it wasn't going to be called Kinderspiel, I was thinking of calling it Solmo Press, which was the city that Ovid, the Roman poet, was from. but I thought Kinderspiel sounded better.
I agree. I think you made the right choice there. In fact, it reminds me of this great scene in this movie. The film's called Yes Men, starring Jim Carrey. And there's this scene where he's speaking to the female character, love interest, whose name escapes me right now, sadly. But she says this wonderful thing. And the thing she says is that when we are kids, we think the world is a playground. And somewhere along the way, we forget.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Movie.
Yeah, Yes Man is the movie.
Yeah. On the topic of Jim Carrey, what's your view on whether he was kidnapped and replaced with a French person, or whether it was
Kidnapped in what?
a few topical cultural references I was aware of? What do we think about that? Not to hijack the conversation.
Well, having read his book, his autobiography, and been disappointed in the fanciful fiction that he put in there, because I wanted the nitty gritty, reality. I find his mix of enlightened awareness and Hollywood vanity to be refreshingly obtuse. To say that more clearly, I love his detachment from taking himself seriously, and I think it's also a paradox that he would be the kind of guy that would get plastic surgery and that cares about what people think about him.
Yeah. That's a good observation. What do you think, Greg?
I don't know enough to have a real comment. But didn't you just say, I thought you said like there was a conspiracy that he was kidnapped and replaced.
Someone, I mean, I could possibly have my details wrong, but I remember reading, or I think the article was about the conspiracy theorists saying that that's not the real Jim Carrey, because how's he speaking French and he looks different. And Mark,
yeah, he appeared at an award show, and it was clearly a different face. He had some work done. Either that, or he went through a really intense kind of spiritual revamping, and it changed the whole way that his body holds his face, which I wouldn't put past it, but it's clearly plastic surgery.
All right, so here's
French. I don't think he'd ever been publicly speaking French as fluently as that, and so it was the verbal with the physical, as you say, Mark, that got the antennas up.
Well, here's my answer to that. From what little I know of him, he had a romantic partner that committed suicide. He was a person who was flat broke and suddenly getting $20 million per picture. There's all these elements in his life that seem to me ingredients for preposterous scenarios over a length of time. So it's probably the same person that was born Jim Carrey and is carried on in quite the adventurous life. Even that time where he did the movie, and I just spaced out the Kaufman.
Yeah.
Where he played
Man on the Moon.
Right.
Yeah, Man on the Moon.
Right. From what I understand, like I've heard some people berate him for the choice he made to go so deeply into it, and others are like, he embodied Kaufman. And he himself, I think, took a break, saying something happened that changed who he was. It's kind of going like a lot of people think Bob Dylan with that motorcycle crash in 65. Like it was a different Bob Dylan that was walking the world.
And Kanye, apparently, whether you like the guy or not, made that comment about he had some event, whether it was an accident, a car accident, and he attributes an inflection point to that. They're really interesting things that you highlight there.
And did you ever see the series on Netflix, Adolescence?
I did not, no.
It's a British series. There's 4 episodes. And real quickly, the premise is this 13-year-old boy is arrested for murder in his family home. And then the 4 episodes are about that. And what I loved about it, at the very end, I was left with this element of how wonderful life is with us being broken as humans. There's an element of we're broken. And still within that. It's kind of like that Cohen song where the breaks and cracks is how the light gets in.
I love that. I really do. I'm gonna have to watch the movie or the series, but I also just love there's a line in the book actually where she's sitting on the couch looking at the rain outside, and the storm has migrated into creating these beautiful amber yellow hues of light on the street that are enabled through the water. And she has this introspection about how it's interesting that such beauty can come from such chaos.
There it is.
It exactly. That is it.
Yeah, I really like that. That's great. I'll have to check those out.
Well, I think that's a great spot to leave the conversation open. I've certainly enjoyed meeting you, Evan Marks, and I'm going to finish the book as things allow, as time allows. And we have the information for how people can get a hold of you, your website, and that sort of thing. Is there anything else you want to add before we ask our final question?
No, other than I really enjoyed this conversation, guys. Thank you, and thanks for the really good questions and discussion. I learned some stuff from you guys, and I also appreciate the kind words about the reading experience. So thanks again. It was a blast.
All right, so we have a question that we ask all our guests. It's something we cherish. We take it seriously. And we both, Greg and I can guarantee you, we're sitting on the edges of our seats now because this is our favorite part.
Greg,
so,
right, here we
Greg,
go.
if you'll do the honors, please.
All right. So, Evan, Eminem or Foo Fighters?
Foo Fighters.
Ah, that was a quick answer. All right.
Yeah, I love those guys. Dave Grohl, Nirvana, and everything he achieved with Foo Fighters. Yeah, I mean, musically speaking, I can't comment on personalities, but it's all about the music. I mean, look, Eminem's awesome, what he's achieved, and the lyricism and everything else, but I'm just personally attached to the Foo Fighters. What about you guys?
What our
takeaway is
we want to see them do a collaboration together. It's too hard.
Definitely.
Right. That's one of the Moped Outlaws long-term goals, is to produce and be able to see and hear the results of that unholy alliance.
Yeah, I would love to see that. You can see anything's bloody possible now in terms of the combinations or the partnerships, whatever that you see these performers do. Although I just don't get the feeling that the two would be able to be in the same room with each other and not kill one another.
I don't know. They both seem like super professional. They both,
yeah.
You know,
I agree. It doesn't sound like there's a spark of mutual interest that would drive them together creatively. But, you know, we would have never said Elton John and Marshall Mathers either. So anything's possible, as you said. And thank you for believing in yourself enough, Evan, to create this book. Please keep doing that. Stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you in the future. If you've got another author that you've brought on board that we could talk to from your publishing house, or just love to hear from you again in the future. Thanks so much for being with us.
Likewise, and really appreciate the time, guys. This was a fun and wonderful experience. So thanks a lot, and I will definitely keep in touch.
Recording stopped.